For a small island, Taiwan has a lot of firepower. It relies on compulsory military service to fill its ranks and defend against invasion from longtime rival China. But faced with growing public discontent, Taiwan's leaders are promising to ditch the draft and create a new breed of soldier. I'm Steve Chao. On this edition of 101 East, we gain rare access to Taiwan's special forces and ask, can this vibrant democracy fend off China with a volunteer army? It's Hell Week, a 6-day, 5-night test of endurance and will for those hoping to become frogmen, members of Taiwan's elite Special Forces Amphibious Unit. Those who pass the test will become the island's equivalent to U.S. Navy SEALs. We've been invited to witness this trial of strength and stamina. The men are fit, committed, and like 25-year-old Pan Changyu, patriotic to the core.
Taiwan is surrounded by oceans and is open to attack, and so I believe we need a strong military. This training has not only challenged me, but it's allowed me to dream and has given me a sense of adventure.
Pan's father is a cop, and Pan says he grew up believing in honor and duty. He also believes Taiwan is under threat and needs dedicated people to defend it.
If my country calls on me to fight a war, I'll readily do so. There is no room for me if my country no longer exists, so I put it before myself.
These are just the type of soldiers Taiwan's military dreams of recruiting as it tries to transform itself into a volunteer army. Every year, Taiwan conducts war games, exercises aimed at protecting the island against its greatest threat, China. The two sides have been at odds since 1949. That's when communists overthrew the Chinese government. Those loyal to the toppled regime fled across the 180-kilometer strait to Taiwan and eventually set up an independent democracy. This has made an increasingly powerful China feel hemmed in. Just off its shores is the first island chain, made up of Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines, all U.S. allies. If China could gain access to Taiwan, it would give its naval forces a strategic launch point into the greater Pacific Ocean. China has never shied from stating it sees Taiwan as its territory. On state-run television, it regularly broadcasts military exercises aimed at simulating a takeover of Taiwan by force.
China has been rapidly developing its weaponry with the aim of taking Taiwan. Besides state-of-the-art jet fighters and warships, it's also copied the US in deploying missiles that use satellites to improve targeting. The threat to Taiwan has never been greater.
To guard against China, Taiwan has relied on mandatory military service for every man on the island, but where draftees could once be counted on. Today, few feel the urgency to defend the island. And instead of preparing to battle the enemy, some here are more engaged in the Battle of the Bulge. The morning drill appears to be a struggle. So low are fitness levels among young males on the island. A basic workout is an ordeal. New draftee Shi Pei-hung explains why young Taiwanese aren't into the military.
Fewer people in Taiwan are having children these days. The kids they do have are frankly spoiled. Most parents don't want their children to undergo the hardships that come with serving in the army. And most of my generation don't want that hardship either.
Faced with public anger about the physical demands of training, the government ordered the army to go easier on recruits. Those who can't live up to the challenges are now given breaks after a few hundred yards of light jogging. 3 years of mandatory military service has also been whittled down to just 1. And in an attempt to appeal to an internet and video game generation, the first weeks of training are geared more heavily to learning to shoot.
For the vast majority of these men, this is the first time they've ever used a gun. By the time they're done here, they'll have to be able to hit the bullseye 4 times in 6 shots.
Shi, whose father and grandfather were both in the Air Force, proves to be a quick learner. He nails most of his targets.
I think I did pretty well, actually. This is only my 3rd time ever shooting, but in class, our instructor taught us in detail how to aim, so I was able to do it.
Soon, this system of enforced training could be a thing of the past. Taiwan's government wants to instead recruit a force of volunteers. The man behind the push to ditch the draft is none other than the island's president, who meets us for an exclusive interview. Ma Yingzhou, a former Marine, bluntly admits the system of conscription is broken.
The
military force at the moment is always training rookies and isn't ready for combat action. Service periods are too short. The second thing is that all draftees are sent to boot camp when they could be doing something much more productive in society.
Do you really believe that you can truly create a volunteer army that's professional enough to defend Taiwan?
With the all-volunteer force, the soldiers and officers in the military will receive more training than before, and it would be much more effective. I'm very confident in this regard.
At the center of the president's plan are the special forces. While the military will need men for regular divisions, the focus will shift to smaller elite units who can carry out missions that require tougher, more complex skills. The problem is finding enough qualified soldiers with a balance of brawn and brains. Hell Week is taking its toll on this group of frogmen trainees. They've had days of little sleep. This recruit freezes, appearing dazed. And no amount of coaxing from his superiors can get him moving. "36 began this tryout, but today only 10 remain. Others encourage the struggling soldier not to give up. The pep talk works, and he asks the instructor if he can rejoin the group. The officer allows him to stay. Han grew up climbing mountains and has an easier time of things, but he too questions the ability of his generation and fears Taiwan's military won't find enough able men.
There are others who want to do what I do and join up, but I'm sad to say they don't have the courage or stamina to succeed.
The military has another problem with its recruiting. The force has a bad image. On a cold, wet day in central Taiwan, Hu Su-jung and her family arrive at a temple to hold vigil. It's here her son's ashes are kept, and where she believes his tormented soul remains. Her son was a conscript in the army. Just 3 days before finishing his year of service, his mother got a call from the military telling her he was dead.
Everything reminds me of him. He was such an outgoing, sweet boy. What I can't bear is to think about how he spent the very last days before his death.
Security camera footage released in court shows that Hu's son, on the far right, had been drilled to exhaustion. He had been caught with a smartphone on a military base, which was illegal at the time. As punishment, he was held in confinement, given little water, and forced to perform a harsh regime of exercises. In testimonies, the court learned that when he collapsed from heat stroke, officers closed ranks and tried to conceal the reasons for his death. 13 military officers were found guilty of abuse and a cover-up, but the maximum jail sentence handed down was 8 months. To this day, Hu has kept her son's room at home untouched. She is unable to move on.
When his body was first brought back home, I kept talking to him, telling him that Mom is so sorry for letting you go through so much torture. I failed to fulfill the duty to protect him.
But on the streets, the blame was directed at the military. More than 100,000 people protested in front of the president's office, denouncing a military culture seen as abusive. At a memorial service, Ma Ying-jeou personally apologized and promised to overhaul the system, but the damage was done. Recruiting numbers plummeted. The volunteer army had been set to start this year. The incident forced officials to delay it to 2017.
Taiwan is trying to achieve what it took the US government 15 to 20 years to do.
Military analysts say Ma and his government are being too ambitious.
The Taiwanese do not seem to have, at least at this point, the will to fight and the will to defend the nation that you see among American population, for example. There is a lack of pride, if you will, in the armed forces here.
What is the ultimate danger if this program fails?
I maintain that it remains one of the world's most dangerous flashpoints. The world does not understand this because they have not truly paid attention to what's going on in Taiwan at the granular level.
Beyond military tensions, China's presence in Taiwan is being felt in other ways. These days, the biggest risk of invasion comes from Chinese tourists. Since President Ma took power in 2008, he's opened travel routes and signed more than 20 bilateral agreements with China. And on Taiwan's Jinmen Island, formerly the front lines of battle, a number of bases have been closed and turned into spots for sightseers.
This is just like our own country. We are brothers bound to each other. We are all each other's fellow men.
Some say the influx of tourists and business people amounts to a subtle takeover. Analysts agree, saying building closer economic and trade ties is risky and makes Taiwan reliant on China.
When you deal with an authoritarian regime that does not even recognize your sovereignty, you can do a lot of things to try to improve relations, but at the end of the day, you still know what their end goal is.
The president disagrees, arguing forging ties keeps the peace.
We cannot resort to war to solve problems. There still exist tensions between us and mainland China, but we hope to resolve the disputes in a peaceful manner, because only then can we protect the interests of Taiwan.
But at an abandoned bunker on the island of Jinmen, we meet a man who says he's seen China's destructive intentions. At 84, Qin Zhijiang is one of the last surviving veterans to fight in battles against Chinese forces. In the late 1950s, China launched waves of successive attacks on Jinmen. Qin still remembers the bombs, the sandy beaches filled with blood and bodies, and the one day his unit was called to repel invading Chinese forces.
There were bullets from so many machine guns flying over my head. I was out in the open, trying to run across the beach and get an order to our troops to take out the enemy's command center.
Qin's unit succeeded and forced Chinese soldiers into retreat. He was given an award for his bravery.
The battle was decisive because, after our sacrifice, people in Taiwan have been allowed to enjoy their freedom and democracy.
But seeing the Taiwan of today, Qin fears the new generation has forgotten the past.
I hope we old soldiers can pass on the spirit to young people in Taiwan, who can then safeguard our way of life and protect our freedom and democracy. Or else, the enemy may make a move. Only if we're strong will the enemy be kept within their bounds.
There are signs China is once again testing Taiwanese resolve. In August, Taiwan's F-16 fighter pilots were forced to scramble. In 4 separate instances, Chinese surveillance planes were spotted on radar entering the island's southwestern edge of its airspace. In each case, the surveillance planes turned back, but only when Taiwan's F-16s arrived on the scene. China did not give an explanation, but it's raised questions in Taiwan over how its Air Force would perform in battle. The last time Taiwan's top fighter pilots engaged in direct combat was some 50 years ago. Back then, there were still open hostilities between China and Taiwan. But in all those major engagements, Taiwan's top guns won out every time. Max Wong is codenamed Weapon. He was trained in the U.S. and believes his skills are equal to some of the world's best. Yet he admits if war were to break out, Taiwan's Air Force would be no match against China.
We have a very huge different numbers between the Taiwan and the mainland China. You know, they probably got more than 3,000 or 4,000 fighters, and we do only have like 400.
The island's military hardware is also aging. The fleet of U.S.-supplied F-16s were state-of-the-art in the 1990s. Today, China spends more than 13 times the amount Taiwan does on defense.
If the combat will happen, probably we can stand for most, I would say, 2 days or 3 days.
The gap between the military capabilities between Taiwan and China has widened quite dramatically. A decade ago, we could have said that Taiwan still had the advantage over the Taiwan Strait. That is no longer the case.
For 60 years, Taiwan has relied on the United States for its military hardware. Weapon sales are part of a U.S. law that has sworn America to protect the island against any threat. But analysts say as China's power grows, it's putting economic and political pressure on the U.S. to stop the supply. Recently, several requests by Taiwan to replace its aging weapons with the latest equipment have been turned down. The U.S. has its own budget woes and an overstretched military. Taiwan's president says its old ally can no longer be counted on.
Due to the rise of mainland China and some difficulty the U.S. encountered in other aspects over the past 10-20 years, we cannot rely on the U.S. to provide us with a safety umbrella like before.
Instead, Ma's administration is rushing to develop the island's own arms industry. Officials showed us made-in-Taiwan missiles and missile launchers. For the high seas, the military has also designed fast attack boats aimed at disrupting a Chinese fleet. Retired military commanders agree that this is the strategy Taiwan must pursue.
If Taiwan can beef up its capabilities in surveillance systems and develop land-to-sea weaponry, Taiwan will pose a greater deterrent force than it currently has. And only then we will have a fighting chance.
But commanders also say with more sophisticated weaponry comes the need to have people skilled enough to use it. On that front, Taiwan has unleashed a major recruiting campaign. At this high school, the military rolls out marching bands and mascots, trying to catch the attention of an easily distracted internet generation. There's even a rock band made up of Air Force Top Guns. They at least appear to be a hit and boost the military's cool factor. Recruiters here tell us they're hoping to pique the interest of top-performing students, male and female. The government has also raised the salaries several times. Entry-level recruits now stand to make thousands more than a recent university grad. While the government says 2014's recruiting numbers are double what they had aimed for, it is still a tough sell among some of these students.
In the military, discipline is everything, and no rules can be broken. Little freedom is allowed. Because of this, few people want to join up. I certainly won't.
The kind of commitment Taiwan's military is looking for is intense. Back with the Frogmen trainees, it's now the final night of Hell Week. Officials give the 9 remaining soldiers the mission to retake a base seized by the enemy. The packs are heavy, and if they weren't exhausted before, they are now. Some are having a tough time just staying awake. The formerly tough-talking recruit, Pan Chang-yu, is out of words.
Yeah. 头脑怎么样？空白。空白。
We watch as the trainees keep making mistakes, and superiors repeatedly order them to retrace their steps.
下个点在哪边？
The frustration among the officers is evident.
枪口面向哪里？指向在哪里？前面呐！枪口的方向都是错。心态上面，可能意志力没有像以前的那些前辈比较前辈那么的坚决，现在还会有意志不坚的状况。
怎么办？
还是继续练。现在真的这样。
Officers order them to start again. They'll have to keep repeating the drill until they get it right.
刚刚都已经讲过了，你们退回去，把你们的包包都拿过来。
好是。
But by morning on the last day, the men have finally succeeded. They face their last and final test. One by one, they must crawl over 50 yards of volcanic stone without using their hands and feet. Called the road to heaven, family and friends are invited to offer moral support. But for many, this ordeal of pain is too hard to watch. Pan is the first to reach the end, to the relief of his family.
I'm so proud of him, for sure. After seeing what he has just been through, I couldn't be more proud of him as his mom.
For the new frogmen, it has been a lesson in willpower.
The training has been tough, but the most difficult part is actually the final minutes, where all you have left is your own strength of will. Being so exhausted, it was hard to hang in there.
All 9 make it, and after more training, they will serve in special force units stationed in some of the harshest parts of the island. they'll be joining soldiers like these, members of the new military that's emerging. How they handle themselves if the ultimate test arises will speak to the wisdom of Taiwan's move away from conscription to a volunteer army. It's a decision that could determine the future of Taiwan as an independent democracy.